In 1860, Abraham Lincoln became President of the United States. This upset many southern states because they felt that they didn't have a voice in the government and politics. This caused them to secede from the Union, forming the Confederacy. Jefferson Davis was elected their president, while Abraham Lincoln stayed with the Union. While Southern troops shot first at Fort Sumter, the Union saw this as a threat and fought back, causing the Civil War to start. Abraham Lincoln and the North's main goal was to preserve the Union, while the Southern's main goal was to become their own country with the help of Britain. Throughout the Civil War, many people, places, and things affected the outcome. Both sides in the war had advantages that they both thought were more superior than the other sides. The North had more of a population of people, and they had 110,000 out of 130,000 factories in the country. This meant more people can be working and making goods in the factories for the army. They could also sell more goods to other countries to gain money to pay for soldiers in the war. The North also had a bigger system of railroads and telegrams. This meant more soldiers could be shipped faster, and goods, like food, can be sent faster than on foot. Also, Lincoln could message his generals way faster, and this messaging led to better strategies and knowledge on what to do. The North had a battle strategy they used as well. They blocked off all of the water routes, making the South blocked off from their supplies. The South also had a few advantages. The South had a lot of plantations, more than the North. There they grew crops such as 2/3 of the world's cotton. These crops could be useful as goods for the war, and they could also sell them to other countries for money for the war. Also, all the experienced army generals were on the southern side, and they fought on the southern turf. This meant the South had more elaborate strategic plans, and they gained more support on their side. The main strategy was to stay put on the southern turf and wait until the Union would get tired. They also had to march less to other places, leading to less tired soldiers, and they can get their goods way faster. So, both sides in the Civil War thought they can beat each other with those advantages. These advantages were later proved to be very helpful in terms of making goods such as mini balls and ironclads, and the South's experienced generals proved to be very helpful as well. These strengths made each side have an upper hand in each other, which will help both sides of the war try to win the war. Sides used cannons that had farther and more accurate range. They also had more accurate rifles with faster reload time. Because of these new weapons, armies using old military tactics would get completely mowed down. Ironclads were also used to protect ships from cannon fire. The Battle of Hampton Roads was a great example of an ironclad fight. Both ships were so well protected that neither gained a true victory, and the only injuries were from smoke inhalations. Next, the war generals used many military tactics to try to ensure victory. For example, General George McClellan was at the Confederate capital and had an obvious advantage over the Southern Army. However, to ensure victory, McClellan waited for more troops, but that gave the Confederacy time to strengthen their defense and caused McClellan's army to lose in the Battle of Chesapeake Bay. Another tactic was when General Sidney Johnson surprised General Ulysses S. Grant's army at their camp. Although they still lost, it was an important military strategy, and it was the way Confederacy tried to have a leg up against the Union. Battle of Antietam was another important battle with military strategies. The Union Army pounded the Confederate troops, and both sides suffered over 12,000 casualties. Because of the new advancement and technology, both sides in the war suffered many deaths, but the North won anyway.
McClellan had a chance to follow Lee's army and attack it, but was too cautious to do so. So, this led to the South getting more reinforcements, and it also led to McClellan getting fired.
The Battle of Antietam was still very important because it finally gave Lincoln a chance to issue his Emancipation Proclamation. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, there were many things that happened because of it. First off, Lincoln and his cabinet members knew the slaves were a part of the war effort for the South, so they issued the proclamation when they would win a big battle. After the win in Antietam, Lincoln knew the time was right.
Once the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, it had little to no immediate effect, but it changed the war for a fight to freedom. This meant the two armies were fighting for the freedom of slavery instead of preserving the Union like Lincoln tried to do.
Next, the proclamation made Britain not side with the Confederacy because they had slaves. It could have made the South stronger, adding another army to fight for it, but Britain didn't do it. Finally, the proclamation freed slaves in the South. This had two effects in the South. Since the slaves helped make goods such as cotton, there was nobody left to make them. This caused the economy to flop due to there being no goods and no money rolling in from the goods. Inflation happened, which is a rise of prices for goods, and there became riots and death from starvation. The second effect was that many freed slaves went and joined the army under the Union and poured their souls out on the battlefield. One Union general even said, quote, "They make even better soldiers in every respect than any troop I have ever had under my command." End of quote. Because of the Emancipation Proclamation, the South's economy dropped and the Union gained more slaves and an advantage in the war. The Southern economy was just one of the many ways the war affected the South. The war created a division between more than Southerners and Northerners. The Northern and Southern Democrats who didn't support the war were split because of it. The Southerners who didn't own any slaves didn't really care about the war and didn't want to interfere with it. With Northerners, who were also called Copperheads, didn't support the Emancipation Proclamation because they believed Lincoln caused the war. The war also affected the economy and politics of both sides. Because of the both sides having a high number of casualties and a low number of troops in the army, the South first placed a draft to pull out all regular people and join either the North or the South depending on the location.
There was no way of getting out of being drafted into the war without owning 20 or more slaves from the South.
Later, the North felt like they should incorporate the draft laws into their side too. But because of the draft laws, there was a need of workers in the factories. This made Congress issue the very first income tax, which also came with an inflation because there wasn't enough production happening at the factories for the South and the North armies to receive goods because of the draft. The South was hit with this inflation the hardest, and their economy collapsed. This made the South increasingly weaker, and the North, because they couldn't suffice their own army, which made their army weaker, killing them and giving the North an upper hand in the war now. Women were affected in a good way because of the draft. The draft gave women more opportunities in the job industry. Women were now accepted into much more jobs other than a housewife. Women were working jobs as nurses, cooks, and any other jobs men were doing before the draft. This made women more respected, but also helped sustain the North because of the inflation. This war caused many changes to the people and politics in the South. Because of this, Lincoln and his generals exploited these changes and attacked the South while they were vulnerable. This ended up changing the tide of the war. After the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, the North was losing many battles, including Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. After those wins, General Lee felt confident with his army and didn't follow his strategy. He led his army, and they marched to the north to fight on Northern territory. As they were heading up to the north, a skirmish broke loose in Gettysburg, and Lee sent his whole army to fight there. The Northern generals had to withdraw and set up in a hook formation. Then, they also got the high ground on a place called Cemetery Ridge. This move by the Union Army and generals proved to be victorious, as the South couldn't beat the North in the Gettysburg and had to retreat back to the South. Next, Lincoln ordered Grant and his army to take down Vicksburg. The town was well guarded and Grant could infiltrate it. So, at midnight, Lincoln sent his ships to go down to the Mississippi and block off the army from Vicksburg. The town shot at the ships while the army went around to the unguarded area and laid siege on the town. Grant used the siege tactic, which is to surround a given area and shoot until the person surrenders or dies. This tactic proved to be very useful because it starved many of the people inside the town, and they either had to die or surrender. Finally, William Tecumseh Sherman used the tactic of all-out war to destroy the South and get Lee and his army to surrender. These two battles led to the Union completing their goal of taking the Mississippi and would help them complete their main goal, which was to take over the capital. This was important because now the Union gained control of the main river where supplies get shipped, and the Union could also use those items to their advantage. Also, General Lee knew the war would go downhill from there and that they would lose. Because of Lincoln and his generals, the tide of the war changed. This caused General Lee to surrender to Grant, and the Union won the war. After the Civil War ended, the southern states came back to the Union, and the U.S. was back together. All of the African American slaves were also freed.
The war left a big dent in American history because of all the money lost and the death casualties, exceeding 6 million in today's population.
Within a week after the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed, leaving the country with no clue on what to do next. This started the Reconstruction era of the country.